The biophilia hypothesis posits that peaceful or nurturing elements of nature helped us regain equanimity, cognitive clarity, empathy, and hope. When love, laughter, and music weren't around, there was always a sunset. The humans who were most attuned to the cues of nature were the ones who survived to pass on those traits. Biophilia explains why even today we build houses on the lake, why every child wants a teddy bear, and why Apple names itself after a fruit, and its software after noble predators, surfing spots, and national parks. The company is brilliant at instilling biophilic longing and affiliation at the same time it lures us inside. It should come as no surprise that crosstalk operates between the brain and nature, but we're less aware of the ever-widening gulf between the world our nervous systems evolved in and the world that they live in now. We celebrate our brain's plasticity, but plasticity only goes so far. As Miyazaki explained it, throughout our evolution we've spent 99.9% of our time in nature. Our physiology is still adapted to it. During everyday life, a feeling of comfort can be achieved if our rhythms are synchronized with those of the environment. Of course, he's talking about the nice parts of nature found in the hillsides of Japan, not the scum ponds or barren terrains of the globe that also constitute nature. Stick an office worker there and relaxation will likely not be happening. But Miyazaki points out that naturalistic outdoor environments in general remain some of the only places where we engage all five senses, and thus, by definition, are fully physically active. It is where our savannah-bred brains are, to borrow from John Moore, home, whether we consciously know it or not. By contrast, Muir wrote of time not in the wilderness. I am degenerating into a machine for making money. Make that a machine with clogging pipes. To prove that our physiology responds to different habitats, Miyazaki has taken hundreds of research subjects into the woods since 2004. He and his colleagues, then also of Chiba University, found that leisurely forest walks compared to urban walks deliver a 12% decrease in cortisol levels. But that wasn't all. They recorded a 7% decrease in sympathetic nerve activity, a 1.4% decrease in blood pressure, and a 6% decrease in heart rate. Our psychology questionnaires, they also report better moods and lowered anxiety. As Miyazaki concluded in a 2011 paper, this shows that stressful states can be relieved by Shinrin therapy. And the Japanese eat it up, with nearly a quarter of the population partaking in some Shinrin action. Hundreds of thousands of visitors walk the forest therapy trails each year. I met up with Miyazaki at the country's newest proposed therapy site, Juniko State Park, on the edge of the Shirakami Mountains in northern Japan. He was swatting mosquitoes from his face and neatly trimmed hair. He wasn't looking relaxed at all. It had rained recently and he was worried the trail might be too muddy for his upcoming walking experiment. He was kicking some rocks out of the way and overseeing the setting up of a netted, canopied mini-lab. The next morning, Miyazaki and Lee would be bringing 12 male college student volunteers here, measuring various vital signs after they walked and sat and generally forest-bathed. Then they would repeat the experiment the next day in downtown Hirosaki, a city of 100,000, 2 hours away by car. I would join as one of Miyazaki's guinea pigs. The trail deemed walkable, several of us retired to a quiet restaurant in Hirosaki. We took off our shoes and sat cross-legged on the floor while Miyazaki ordered and then distributed a baffling array of dishes involving goopy eggs, gelatinous balls, and surf and turf combinations. Why do the Japanese think about nature so much? I asked Miyazaki, who was preparing to eat a mantui. Don't Americans think about nature? He asked me. I considered, some do and some don't, but I was thinking an amazing amount of us don't, giving our downward trend in outdoor time and visits to parks. While we mused, in our culture, nature is part of our minds and bodies and philosophy. In our tradition, all things are relative to something else. In Western thought, all things are absolute. Maybe it was the sake that he was losing me. The difference is in language, he continued. If I ask you, is a human a dog? You say, no, a human is not a dog. In Japan you say, yes, a human is not a dog. The great sensei of nature research peered over at me, over his chopsticks. I was reminded of the story of the Zen student who asks his teacher, how do you see so much? And the teacher responds, I close my eyes. Miyazaki's answer, I understood, was like a clone, tantalizing and confounding at the same time. But you had to trust the guy was onto something. The next morning, the college boys and I took turns sitting in the mobile lab at the trailhead. We placed hard cotton cylinders under our tongues for 2 minutes, then spit them out into test tubes. That would record our levels of cortisol, a hormone made in the adrenal cortex. We got hooked up to probes and devices. The team was inaugurating a brain-measuring, battery-powered, near-infrared spectrometer that, when deployed, gave me a sensation of leeches sticking to my forehead. We'd repeat all these measurements at the end of the walk and again in the cityscape. To gauge Earth physiological responses to these environments, Miyazaki and Lee look at the changes in blood pressure, pulse rate, variable heart rate, salivary cortisol, and new this year hemoglobin in the brain's prefrontal cortex. When aggregated, these metrics paint a picture of our nervous system. When we are relaxed and at ease in our environment, the parasympathetic system, sometimes called the rest and digest branch, kicks in. This is why food tastes better in the outdoors, explains Miyazaki. But the demands and constant stimuli of modern life tend to trigger our sympathetic nervous system, which governs fight or flight behaviours. And trigger it. We suffer the consequences. A long trail of research dating back to the 1930s shows people who produce chronically high cortisol levels and high blood pressure are more prone to heart disease, metabolic disease, dementia and depression. More recent research shows that the steady stress of urban living changes the brain in ways that can increase our odds of schizophrenia, anxiety and mood disorders. When it was my turn to wander through the forest for 15 minutes, I was happy to break free from the wires. Light filtered gently through the beeches and Japanese horse chestnuts and the elk. The earth smelled like a good damp dirt. An elderly couple ambled by, assisted by walking sticks and a bear bag. I was briefly mesmerised by a yellow butterfly. I could see why Juniko, a leafy network, trails and lakes as a candidate for the country's next forest therapy station. Local and park officials are seeking the designation because where there's forest therapy, there are tourists and they're young. Miyazaki may have a mystical side, but what drives him more is data. It's a convenient arrangement. The Japanese work on physiology in the brain takes advantage of new tools of brain science, but it builds on decades of psych talk about the health benefits of human nature. Miyazaki wasn't the first to record physical stress recovery in nature. A young psychologist named Roger Ulrich was curious why Sony and Michigan drivers chose to go out of their way to take a tree-lined roadway to the mall. In 1986, using expensive and cumbersome equipment at the time, he hooked up EEG units to the heads of healthy volunteers while they viewed slides of nature scenes or utilitarian urban buildings. The subjects assigned to nature showed higher alpha wave activity, a wavelength associated with relaxation, meditation, and increased serotonin. In another experiment, he stressed out 120 students by showing them movies of bloody accidents in a woodworking shop. He knew they were distressed because he measured their sympathetic nervous activity, the sweat glands on their skin, the heart rates and blood pressure. Afterwards, some students were assigned to watch a 10-minute video of nature scenes, and some to watch videos of urban scenes from the pedestrian mall, the cars on the road. The results were dramatic. Within 5 minutes, the brain on nature returned to baseline. The brains on built environment recovered only partway, as indicated by those nervous system measures, even more than 10 minutes later. Despite early promise, the study of brains on nature went fairly dark for a couple of decades. It was much considered soft science, much of it based on qualitative measures, in a medical world dazzled by genetics and modern chemistry, and funded by pharmaceutical companies that didn't stand to make a profit from houseplants or garden views. The renewed interest of late represents a convergence of ideas and events. The relentless march of obesity, depression, anxiety, even in affluent communities and despite more medication. The growing recognition of the role of the environment on genes, and the growing academic and cultural unease of their widening breach from the outdoors. Not surprisingly, my urban peregrination wasn't quite as pleasant as the soft green trail of Juniku. Downtown Hirosaki is far less green than DC. There are transit stations, shops selling basic goods, and people on the go. In the height of summer, the asphalt was baking. Shoppers rushed in and out of a department store whose busy windows advertised spaghetti with tomato cream. I passed 4 parking lots, 2 taxi stands, a bus station, and 2 loudly idling buses belching fumes. My nervous system responded. My blood pressure had dropped 6 points after walking in the forest. It went up 6 points after walking in the city, which of course begs the question, how long do the feel-good effects of nature last? Do they just get wiped out by the first traffic jam or cell phone ping? Miyazaki is sometimes collaborating, an immunologist in the Department of Environmental Medicine at Nippon Medical School in Tokyo, wondered the same thing. Queen Lee is interested in nature's effect on mood states and stress as manifested in the human immune system. Specifically, he studies natural killer immune cells, called NK cells, which protect us from disease agents and can, like cortisol and hemoglobin, be reliably measured in a laboratory. A type of white blood cell. They're handy to have around since they tend to self-destruct messages to tumours and virus-infected cells. It's been known for a long time that factors like stress, aging and pesticides can reduce your NK count, at least temporarily. So we wonder